Something that all art forms share in common with each other is that they're all created by a person or a team of people. No matter the medium, there is always an author behind every work of art. Whereas paintings and novels are generally known to be the creation of a singular individual, film has a much more complex relationship with the idea of authorship, as they are made by a large team of people, each leaving their own stamp on the movie in some way. Originally conceptualized in French film criticism, a director is regarded as the auteur, which essentially means that they are the primary creative force in filmmaking and therefore the true author of a motion picture. In a modern context of film criticism, this term is reserved for filmmakers that have such a distinct style that just about every aspect of the film is distinguishable to their identity. It is very interesting to look at the way that auteurs come into their own in terms of technique and subject matter, as they generally don't develop their unique voice until after making a few films first. Alfred Hitchcock, one of cinema's most celebrated auteurs, has stated on multiple occasions that The Lodger, despite being his third feature film, is the first true Hitchcockian motion picture. Another filmmaker who is so strongly identified by their distinct symmetrical style is Wes Anderson. Even though he had a strong control of his visuals since the inception of his career with Bottle Rocket, he clearly developed this style more and more with each film in order to get to the point of where it is today. However, there are clear exemptions to this unofficial rule. One filmmaker who proves to have had a clear voice from their very first film is none other than Sam Raimi. Breaking out of the independent scene in the early 80s, Raimi's distinctive voice stirred audiences from all around the world with his landmark hit of The Evil Dead. From its iconic camera work to its unique tone, Raimi demonstrates a unique form of expression that is so clearly identifiable to him that his style was cemented right from the get-go. And, antithetically to the auteurs discussed before, instead of developing his unique style further with each film, Raimi marks another breed of auteurs who is able to transcend both independent and mainstream cinema to become one of the most extraordinary American filmmakers working today. This video was set out to distinguish the way that Raimi's one-of-a-kind style morphed over his prosperous career to get to the point of where it is today. As he rose in popularity, Raimi was able to take advantage of his signature cinematic techniques by combining them with more mainstream ones in order to create truly distinct works that are both artistic and commercial. The most clear ways that Raimi demonstrates his strength as an auteur is primarily through a strong sense of tone and visuals. If there is one thing that Sam Raimi is best known for, it's his mastery over genre blending. Through this, he's able to elicit a wide array of emotions out of his audience within his scenes. Even The Evil Dead, despite being made as a straight horror film, features numerous comedic elements throughout the picture that demonstrate Sam's past as a comic. Growing up, Raimi was interested in comedy more than anything else. The short films that he and his friends used to make were primarily light-hearted and low-budget comedies greatly inspired by the Three Stooges. As a result, Sam creates movies that, regardless of the genre, feature pronounced elements at times that most often than not lean towards comedy. The film opens with a scene that shows his strength as a visionary. We as the audience are put in the perspective of a mysterious force that moves through the woods in a haunting fashion. The visuals and sound design to this are quite horrific and help show his strength as a visual storyteller. However, as the film progresses, the low budget and almost campy scenario bring the tone to an almost comedic side. His most celebrated example of shifting tones is the sequel to his first movie, Evil Dead 2, a film that has simultaneously made Best Horror and Best Comedy movie lists for decades. When discussing the horror film Evil Dead 2, Paul Feig explains how the film takes place in a cartoonish realm so exaggerated it is hard to take seriously. The same can be said for a number of Raimi's other films, as that is a clear staple of his filmmaking tool belt. Raimi is a master at switching between tones within his films. However, as opposed to changing tones from scene to scene, like in most other horror comedies, Raimi will masterfully switch tones numerous times within a scene. In this iconic sequence from Evil Dead 2, Raimi takes a climactic moment that should be horrific given the circumstances, yet he plays it for laughs. Huh? Again, Raimi uses his strength as a visual director to further capitalize on his tone-shifting nature. He uses the camera to create even more hilarious gags that spoof the first movie, such as this. Additionally, he also implements another tenet of his style, his frenetic and quick editing, to create comedic and chaotic sequences. Only a few years later, Raimi left his stamp as an auteur on his first superhero outing, Darkman. This film showcases a similar style featured in his Evil Dead series, as this movie's genre bounces back and forth from being a thriller, to being an action movie, to being a fantastical horror picture. Perhaps no other moment in the film demonstrates his rapid tone-shifting style better than the infamous carnival scene. Here, he showcases his frenetic sense of visual editing that demonstrates his quirky and quick visual style while simultaneously jumping through a series of different moods and tones.
It doesn't matter, Pete.
It matters. I won a pink elephant for my girlfriend.
Why don't you just, get lost, pal?
Elephant. Quickly.
Didn't you hear me? Weirdo. Scratch.
There are multiple aspects of the scene that showcase the main tenets of Sam's work. First of all, the camera movements and Dutch tilts were all there from the very beginning of his career. His editing creates numerous comedic moments throughout the scene, and Liam Neeson telling Frances McDormand to
Thank the fucking elephant.
showcases how none of it is really supposed to be taken seriously anyway. Here, Sam puts his authorial voice on display as he puts his individualistic spin on this energetic scene. However, Raimi's filmmaking style did not always stay similar to how it was in the Evil Dead series and in Darkman. While all the movies discussed before were relatively popular, they were all still regarded as cult films and were not necessarily celebrated by everyone. For some, Raimi's unique tone-shifting and frenetic and quirky style was too much to handle. After rising to some sort of prominence and getting the opportunity to direct a studio film at Paramount, Raimi, for the first time in his career, toned down his common directorial trademarks a significant amount. Without the independence that he had when making his first few films, Raimi had to combine his individualistic style with a more commercial one to create his gripping thriller, A Simple Plan. With this film, Raimi demonstrates his sensibilities of creating a Hitchcockian suspense thriller that keeps the audiences on the edge of their seats throughout the whole runtime. While seeming like a grand departure for the horror comedy legend, Raimi still manages to leave his stamp as an auteur on the film. In one of the most dramatic scenes of the film, well, truthfully, I think it speaks for itself.
No, wait! Let's just talk, okay? Figure this out. Come on, we gotta... Okay? No!
Now that might not have seemed too out of place for most viewers, but when considering Sam Raimi's filmography, that shotgun blast looked like it came straight out of an Evil Dead film. The way she flies up in the air is comical, in the darkest sort of way possible. This is exactly what Raimi had done before so many times in his horror comedies, and here it is on display in a thriller. This is such a morbid and messed up sequence that you can't help but laugh to cope with it. This perfectly demonstrates an evolution in Raimi's directorial technique. In a way to appeal to a more mature and commercial audience, Raimi had to essentially combine his directorial trademarks with more mainstream techniques. As a result, Raimi began to create cinematic works that transcended the categories of commercial and independent, as his movies were stylistic hybrids. With Raimi's rise of popularity in the early 2000s, he further progressed into a more commercial style of filmmaking that started with A Simple Plan. When making the Spider-Man trilogy, Raimi demonstrated a next step towards his tone-blending and visually striking style, so he was able to perfect it for general audiences. This can be seen in his seminal work, Spider-Man 2. The film shifts through a variety of tones throughout the whole picture. It can go from an action scene like this to a horror scene like this. And lastly, to a comedy scene, kind of like this.
Drops are falling on my head, they keep falling because I'm free. Nothing's worrying me.
Sorry.
Raimi demonstrates a slight departure in how he chooses to depict tonal shifting sequences by not making them as exaggerated as before. He successfully weaves them together continuously throughout the whole picture, culminating in the train sequence. Almost as if his whole career was leading up to this moment, Raimi masterfully weaves together a scene that goes through action,
thrilling suspense,
and lastly, a beautiful drama. He demonstrates his ability to combine his tone shifting in one of the most mainstream films by creating an almost genre-fluid superhero work that transcends what he and the genre were known to be capable of.
Hi.
In Drag Me to Hell, Raimi returns to horror in a way that is so incredibly unique to him. After coming off of the massive big-budget Spider-Man movies, Raimi was able to revert back to a less commercial film that granted him more artistic freedom. Throughout Drag Me to Hell, he showcases a style most similar to his early years as a filmmaker, as he constantly throws horrific and hilarious scenes at the audience to a ridiculous degree. Raimi mixes tones most prominently in the seance scene. While seances are generally regarded to be sacred rituals in horror films that ultimately lead to the most terrifying elements of the picture, Raimi makes sure to leave his unique stamp by turning that convention upside down.
I come for you, Christine. You're mine! You tricked me, you black-hearted whore!
No, Milos, no!
You bitch!
He uses quick-paced editing and eccentric visual choices to depict a chaotic scene that dances around a number of emotions, like comedy and horror. Throughout the whole scene, he manages to play some jump scares and other horrific techniques in contrast to the more comedic elements in order to keep the audience going back and forth from laughing to frightened. Lastly, Oz the Great and Powerful marks the last film that Sam has directed. While arguably being his most mainstream studio film, Raimi was still able to implement a great deal of his personality and signature fun style that made his previous films so magical. Through one of the most thrilling sequences at the beginning of the picture, Raimi departs from the family-friendly style of the film to create a horrific scene that is extremely reminiscent of his Evil Dead series. Just as he had done continuously with other pictures in the past, Raimi demonstrates how he can visually capture elements from another genre and implement them into the film he is creating. At the end of the day, it is quite clear that Raimi represents exactly what Dana Polan states in their article, Auteur Desire, about the roles of auteurs. With his incredibly creative style, Raimi shows how he is a visionary who operates in a freedom and purity to give their inviolate world philosophy an arena of expression. He is a filmmaker that shows that the world is not based on one feeling or tone. There is always a laugh to be had in the darkest of moments or in the most terrifying situations. He shows that the world is exciting and a vibrant place that is in a constant state of movement and progression. From his humble beginnings with his horror films, all the way to his superhero adventures and visits to the land of Oz, Raimi has shown an interesting and unique evolution of style like no other filmmaker. Sam Raimi has placed his mark on the cinematic map in the best way possible, and he is without a doubt one of the most striking auteurs that the world has ever known.